Awesome. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Looker Studio for Beginners Part 2, GA4 Visualizations in Looker Studio. So my name is Joanna Jackson. I'm a UX designer with Sandstorm, and I am your host today. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a Caucasian female with blonde hair and glasses. Today we will be showing you how to take the next steps with your Looker Studio reports by building a themed dashboard with charts, trend lines, scoreboards, and pie charts. If you have any questions today for the speakers, please submit them in the Q&A channel and we will address as many as we can. And for general comments, share those in the chat channel. If there's anything that you would like for us to expand on or talk more about in our next upcoming sessions, please let us know. We're always looking for ways to help you and your team have the tools that you need to succeed. So today's presentation will have audio captions and this session is being recorded. Next week, we'll provide a human-corrected transcript and a link to the recording. Immediately after today's presentation, we will share the deck that you're looking at right now. So thank you all so much for attending. We're so excited you're here. Over to you, Kim and Nick.
All right, hello, and welcome back if you attended part one. My name is Cameron Panice. I am a digital strategist here at Sandstorm Design. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a male presenting person wearing it's blue. It looks almost like it's coming through black on the camera, but it is a blue quarter zip. And I'm also wearing some Sandstorm branded merch in the form of a blue baseball cap. I also have Nick here with me.
Hi, my name is Nick Meshes. I'm Sandstorm's Senior Director of Technology. My pronouns are he, him. I am a bald Caucasian male with a handlebar mustache and an oversized headset. I'm very excited to talk to you today. I'm so glad if you're back, if you came to session one, and glad to talk to you today if you're just here for session two.
All righty. Nick, why don't you tell folks a little bit more about Sandstorm?
Yeah, so Sandstorm has been in business for over 25 years now. We're headquartered in Chicago, but we do have teams all over the United States and the continental US. We've been building digital experiences for associations and nonprofits and healthcare organizations and other types of organizations for associations and whatnot, especially 15 plus years experience there. We do believe deeply in research, and so we have over 4,600 hours of usability and user experience research under our belts and growing every day. We have a great understanding of what users need, what visitors needs to come to the site, help you to make great decisions, all based off of research, right? Quantitative analysis. Many of our staff are CPAC certified, accessibility certified, also specialists in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And Sandstorm is a woman-owned certified business.
Excellent. So to talk through what we're going to be covering today, we're going to be doing some more intermediate sort of topics during today's session. If you find yourself at any point like, whoa, what's Looker Studio? How do I connect my data source, et cetera, et cetera? We do recommend that you check out the part one recording by visiting the link on your screen right now or being shared in the chat momentarily. So what we'll be covering today is using our already connected GA4 dataset to create some robust and exciting visualizations to help clearly articulate the trends in our data. Everything that you'll see here today is free to build, assuming that you are using the first-party GA4 Google Data Connector. As with last time, this demo will be using the Google Web Store example data that's available to all users in GA4. If you visit that link right here on your screen, you'll be able to add this demo data to your GA4 property and by extension, be able to add it to Looker Studio. And if you'd prefer to follow along with a written version of this presentation, you can do so on our blog by visiting the link here on your screen. That is sandstormdesign.com/blog/ How Create Custom Reports Looker Studio Part 2 Visualizations. All right, I will go ahead and get started. Just real quick, co-presenters, everyone can see my screen okay? Thumbs up?
Yes.
We're looking at Looker?
Looking good.
Excellent. Cool. So last time, if you attended, we walked through the basics. That was adding GA4 to Looker, making a connection there, and building out a really basic report. We were showing the top 10 pages for the past 30 days from the city of Chicago, sorted by how many users those pages earned. Today, we're going to build something a little bit more exciting, and we're going to end up with a report that kind of looks like what you're seeing on your screen here, something that's styled a little bit differently and uses some of the different visualizations. So I will go ahead and get started. This is where we left off in part one. Again, by page path, we're looking at our top pages from the past 30 days, all coming from the city of Chicago. Which is great, but if we wanted to do any more extensive reporting on this, for example, if we wanted to do more granular data analysis by day, for example, we wanted to see what the top pages were by day and understand those trends based on what we walked through in the last part. You may think, okay, I just need to replace this page path dimension with a date dimension and I can go from there. And while that does work and you can pull insights out of this, it's not the most conductive way of showing this data. And especially if you are a marketer or you are the analytics person at your organization, if you're sharing this report with someone, even if you understand it, they might not, right? So the preferred method that we would want to share this data in would be using a different visualization. And we're going to talk through the one that we would use in this example, which is the trend line. Anytime that you're doing any sort of broad analysis, especially by date, you'll likely want to use this type of visualization. And the way that you can add that into your report is just by jumping into the Add a Chart tab and jumping down to the time series header here. So most of the time, what we've found is that this time series chart works perfectly for our preferences. There are two other versions of it. There's the smooth time series chart, which is just the same, but an aesthetic preference for a smooth chart. And then there's a sparkline chart as well, which normalizes the data and displays it a little bit differently. But for our example, the time series chart will work perfectly. So I'm just going to click on this button right here, and then you'll see now I've got this box following my cursor around. I'm going to place it next to my existing chart. And now we can see we have our time series chart. And already this becomes a lot easier to interpret and understand and share and start to analyze, right? Versus this chart here, we now have this trend line where we can already start making assumptions about our data, right? It looks like from November 15th to November 18th, we had maybe a decrease in traffic. Maybe let's dive into why, right? Or maybe we know why. So definitely very useful to investigate. If you're ever doing reporting over a certain date range, you probably want to include one of these charts. To talk through very quickly how to do some setup, you'll notice and remember if you attended the first part, these dimensions and metrics, right? This is how we built out this chart here. We can do the same here. All of the visualizations, the way that you set them up are very similar. So by default, when you drop in a time series chart, the date dimension is going to be pre-selected. And then Looker was a little bit smart, dynamic, based on what it was seeing elsewhere in the report. It pulled in total users as well, which is great. But if we wanted to maybe switch up what we were reporting on here and we want to get a little bit more granular, let's say we wanted to report by hour. We had a big product launch on our site or something like that on November 1st. I would go ahead, jump in using our pre-added date control, which we walked through how to do in part one, narrow down to the 1st of November this year. And you can see this is not super helpful, right? So we'll need to narrow down the scope a little bit. And the way that you control your x-axis for the time series chart is through your dimension. So right now we're showing date, which is one data point. If I wanted to look by hour, I could just find the hour dimension and apply it. And now we've got this different data, right? Apparently our product launch didn't go very well. But this is a way for us to kind of narrow in a little bit and observe some trends. Maybe we had something strange happen at 12, but we do see a rise right around 9 of users. And then as the day ends, the trend line goes down. I'm going to zoom back out really quick to the last 30 days and add back in my date dimension. And perhaps we want to measure other things as well. So by default, my chart pulled in total users. If I wanted to pull in a different metric, for example, bounce rate, I could do that here, and that will adjust what I'm measuring here on my y-axis and plot it accordingly. So now we're looking at by date, bounce rate. So already you can start to get a feel for how you can use this. But if you want to change the look and feel, you'll want to jump into the style tab. And this is not something that we covered in part 1, but most of the time the setup between different visualizations, they have the same sort of settings. There are a couple of specifics that we'll walk through during this presentation. For example, with the time series chart, by default, when you drop it in, it's going to be a line chart. But if you want to switch it up at any point to a bar chart, you can just do that in here, and then everything automatically updates. For my e-marketers out there, right, if you're delivering branded reports and you want to change the colors or the look and feel of the data within a time series chart, you can do that using this setting here. And let's say, I don't know, our brand is pink. I can update what we're seeing on screen to the color pink. Looker will give you a couple of predefined options at the start, but if you wanted to use like specifically your brand's colors from your brand guidelines, you can jump down to this custom section here and click the plus icon. And then here you can enter a custom hex value or an RGB equivalent. I'm going to switch this back to blue for now and take us back to the line charts. If you wanted to show, for example, the individual data points or data labels on a time series chart, this show data labels settings, once checked, will expose those individual data points. This gets a little bit cluttered, and there are more settings that you can use. You can see once I check that option, we have all these data label settings that have appeared. So you can feel free to play around with that. But if you want to show those data points, that's how you do it. And then you can also add a trend line. We do this a lot because while this visual is easier to understand, one straight trend line is a lot easier to understand, right? These are great for when you're doing sort of large scale analysis of data over a longer time frame. So if I jump in here to the reference line, by default, when I add a reference line, it's going to snap to the left y-axis. Let's say in this example, we set a goal as an organization. We want to keep bounce rate below 50%. That means less than half of our users are exploring the site. They're not just leaving after the first page. And I want to show our progress or see how we did against that goal. I would add a reference line here, and then using this value field, I would enter in 50%. Then you see the reference line moves up, and then I can enter in a custom label. So I will say bounce rate goal. And then if I wanted to, for example, show the reference value in my label, so I wanted to show that this corresponds to 50%. Thankfully for us, this is already pretty called out by the way that we have the x-axis, or rather the y-axis set up. But for example, if this was a more granular number like 0.43%, it's not really clear what this number means. So I can just check this box here, and then it will show with the reference label. And then here, now you can share this visualization with other folks in your organization or your clients. And it's very easy for them to comprehend and understand, okay, for the most part, we hit our goal on these days. We had a bit of a drop on November 12th, for example. So we really like using these reference lines. I did mention trend lines. I jumped ahead a little bit. Apologies for that. These trend lines you can select up here, and this, again, great for data over a long period of time. There are a lot of different trend lines that you can add to a chart. For example, one that we use pretty often is the polynomial trend line, which just kind of smooths out the average over a large data set. It's particularly useful if you're analyzing a large or a highly variable metric. So for example, our bounce rate is pretty up and down here. If we were to use one of the other trend lines, it may sort of follow that curve. Yeah, there are a bunch of different trend lines in here. We won't cover them all today, but the polynomial one is the one we use the most. When we add in the trend line, by default, it'll typically use this like light blue color, which is a little hard to see. Thankfully, you can adjust that here in the settings. Typically, we do this red color here, and then you've got this trend line showing sort of through the past 30 days, right? We started off pretty strong, then we kind of hit a slope at the end, and now at the end of this date range, we're sort of normalizing to where we were at the start. Let's see. So to jump back to our reference lines, I walked through an example of how to do one on the x-axis, or for the y-axis, but if you wanted to label your chart for the x-axis, for example, on December 2nd, we noticed that there is a dip in our bounce rate, right? But maybe we're aware of what that is already. Maybe we did something to the site and it didn't work the way that we intended, or in this rate, it worked perfectly. Maybe this is when we launched our campaign or something like that, and we want to note that in our reporting. Instead of using the y-axis, you would just switch these settings over to the x-axis. And then choose the date that you want to correspond with. So in our example, I said the 3rd or the 2nd. For purposes of demonstration, I'm just going to back this out to November 18th. Perfect. And then just like we walked through with the y-axis example, I would just give this a label and call this campaign launch. And then if I wanted to include that date in the label as well, I could show the reference value in the label. And then there you go. Now you have a chart, right, that initially looked like this and was all this data that was kind of hard to parse. And now you've got something that's a little more clearly explainable to other folks in your organization or your clients, et cetera, whoever may be browsing this report. So this is great. But maybe we wanted to get a little bit more granular with our dimensions. So these trend lines are really, really good when you're comparing one metric against one dimension. But going back to our original example where we were looking at what city folks were coming from, maybe we want to explore that a little bit more. And instead of doing a table like this and just having to scroll and look for other cities in that data, we could just use something like a pie chart. Everyone likes a pie chart, right? The way that we add that to our report is just by jumping into this tab here, like we have with all of our visualizations, and you'll see down below the bar chart is the pie chart. You have two different visualizations. That is your pie chart and your donut chart. We tend to use the pie chart. I'm going to go ahead and drop this in here. And there we go. So Looker was a little bit smart about choosing the dimensions and metrics by default. It saw that I had this chart next to it, which had city and users in it. So it set those as my dimension and metrics. And we're looking pretty good so far. The one thing that you'll probably find yourself doing a ton when you're building your own reports here, if you use the pie chart, you're going to go, oh my gosh, we're killing it in whatever this orange section is. I wonder what it is. This is actually the others grouping. So for everything outside of, by default, your top 10, it all gets grouped into this one pie slice. And for a long time within Looker, it made the pie chart kind of unusable because the first thing people would say is, what is that? What is that slice? They'd get distracted by this giant piece, which is really just an amalgamation of all the other entries in this data set that we're looking at. Thankfully, in a recent update, Google has come to their senses. If I jump into the Styles tab, you'll see underneath pie chart here, this group others section. I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to do that every single time I add a pie chart to a report. It's going to become like muscle memory. I'm very, very grateful that they finally added that in. To talk through really quickly the setup for the pie chart, you've got your city and, or you've got your dimensions and metrics. You can only choose one of each in a pie chart. But if I wanted to do more granular analysis, so let's say, for example, this data is great. I know that in New York and Los Angeles, we're trending pretty well, but maybe I want a more granular view and I want to know, or I want to be able to kind of filter down. Maybe I want to know the state that people are coming from or the country that people are coming from. Instead of just copying and pasting this pie chart and then coming here and going, okay, now I want to see country, and making this big chart, right, that ends up looking a little overwhelming, what I can use is the drill down settings within a visualization to add additional dimensions to this report. So I'm going to go ahead and check this on. And you'll see once I've checked it on, Looker again is trying to be a little bit smart, and it goes, okay, I know you've got the city dimension in here already. I'm going to add country and continent. But you'll notice that nothing about the visualization on screen has actually changed. But if I go through this process again, you'll notice now I've got these arrows within the chart header that weren't there before. So I'm going to turn off drill down again. And you'll see those arrows disappear. Once I turn them back on, they'll reappear again. And so when you share this report with other folks, if they want to get less or more granular based on how you have these dimensions set up, they can just use these arrows to navigate the same visualization, but apply different dimensions to it. So by default, we're showing the city dimension, but if they want a zoomed out view, they can go to country, or if they want even more zoomed out view, they can go to continent. If we wanted to change the level, the default level by which gets loaded when someone opens the report, I can do that here with the default drill down level dropdown. And let's say I want folks to see the continent first and then get more and more granular. You'll see now if I refresh this report, once I land here, you'll see now it's pulling up the continent first. And then if I want to drill down to city, I certainly can. To jump into some of these style settings, we of course talked about the group others selection. You'll be using that button a ton. You can also choose how many slices appear in a pie chart using this drop down here. So if you want to narrow it down, you can go down to 5. If you want to increase it, I think you can do up to 20. I'm not sure that we would recommend that because the legend that appears gets a little unwieldy, right? And we're trying to call out, right, what the insight is in our data. So we'd likely want to narrow that down. Just for our example, I'm going to do our top 5 slices. We can also change the individual colors of each slice in a couple of different ways. So by default, Google is going to use what they call dimension values. If I click this edit icon underneath my color by settings, you'll see that by default, it has set some colors per each value. This is great if you are expecting, or these colors coordinate to a region or a state or a city for some internal reason. For example, if you want New York to be blue and Los Angeles to be red, you can jump in here and update that. What you can also do is apply a slice order color scheme. And this will ensure that every pie chart that you're using in your report will sort of follow the same order, right? So you've set it up here from your biggest entry to your smallest entry in your pie chart, and it will always follow that pattern. If instead of blue, I wanted this to be red, I would just click in here, and we've seen this color menu before. I can either choose one of the default colors that Looker provides, or I can choose a custom color. So for example, if I want to set it to red, I can do that, and I can switch it back to blue. Or again, if you're trying to make a report that is more branded, either for your organization or your client, one of the really cool ones here is coloring by single color. And then you get kind of this gradient effect, which can be cool. With some colors, it doesn't work as well. For example, if, I don't know, our organization was pink, actually, that doesn't look too bad. But if you're trying to pull together a branded report, something that looks really sleek and nice, the single color can be really beneficial as well. To jump back into slice order, one of the things that you might find yourself wanting to do is to increase the size of these labels per slice. And you can do that here underneath our color settings down here in label. I find myself often changing the label color for it to better contrast against the background. But what you'll notice in Looker is, for example, if I change this to white, only a couple of these labels are going to change to pure white. These other ones shifted a little bit from dark black to kind of a gray. And that's not a bug, that's a feature actually. Down here at the bottom, there's this text contrast setting, which allows you to determine how much contrast you want between the label and the pie slice. So for accessibility and user experience, we would recommend that you always have it set to high, but these settings do exist in here if you want to control completely the appearance of the labels within the pie chart. Just use that at your own risk, right? Folks with eyeglasses like me might have to squint a little bit harder if you turn off the contrast settings. So just keep that in mind. The only other thing is the legend, which you can move around using these settings here. So that corresponds to these little bubbles over here. By default, it's always going to appear to the right. But if you want to move it to the bottom, you certainly can. I really like how that looks. I end up doing that most of the time when I'm building reports. You can also move it to the top as well. And then there are a couple of different other settings if you want it left aligned, right aligned, or center. There's also this option for no legend. Not quite sure why that exists, but I suppose if you provide that context elsewhere on the report, this could be a nice way to make a nice, snazzy, minimalistic report. But as we know, data is only as important as its context, right? So we probably want to include some sort of legend that corresponds to the pie slices as well. And that's about it for your pie slice. And now you can see we're starting to build a report here that's looking a little bit more comprehensive than just this table, right? The other metric that, or the other visualization that we often use when we're trying to do big overviews of like, you know, page performance or site performance as a whole, like we want to show you the total user count for the site for a given time period. Instead of breaking it down granular like this, maybe we just want a holistic view of how the site's performing. And we typically do that via the scorecard visualization, which you can see is right here. You get two different styles. One will give you the full number. The other will concatenate the numbers. So if you're dealing with really large numbers, if you run, you know, a website or marketing campaign that has hundreds of thousands of views, A, good for you. And B, you may want to use the compact scorecard to kind of condense things down a little bit. For our purposes, I enjoy kind of that precision. So we're going to use the default scorecard, and then I'm going to drop it in like so. And then you can see very simple in terms of setup. It gives me one number. This is great for your executive summaries or for executive overviews, folks who just need, you know, to know how we're trending and what direction, what our key performance indicators are looking at. Like these are typically included on most of our reports. So by default, Looker has chosen to use the total users count, but typically we'll stack up a couple of these just by Control-C, Control-Ving, copy and pasting. I'll align these next to each other and we'll do total users, sessions, and views. And now we've got kind of those Northern Star metrics to be able to measure what site performance is like as a whole. But as we were talking about earlier, right, these numbers are only as important as the context that surrounds them. If you share this report with me and I'm like, okay, 89,000 users, like, is that good? Is that bad? Is that on our benchmark for our site? Like, where does this factor into our performance as a whole? We can use our comparison date range settings to actually visualize the percentage change from one time period to the next. So I'll walk through how to do that now. On any of the visualizations, if you scroll all the way down underneath your default date range settings, there's this comparison date range setting. And if I tick this on here, let's say we're doing a quarter over quarter analysis, right? So I'm going to update these numbers to show for the last quarter. Excellent. Whoa, something happened over there. If I wanted to compare where we were at Q3 of 2024 to Q2 of 2024, as is typical in some of these reports, if I tick this comparison date range on, I can then either select a fixed date range that I'm choosing. So I can jump back in and I can go, okay, April to July, or I can use some of these custom drop downs that exist. And I can just do this versus previous period. So this is going to look at Q3 versus Q2, and it's going to give me a little number down here at the bottom to let me know how we performed relative to that previous period. You'll also know that versus previous year is here as well. So if I want to do year over year comparisons, it's the exact same flow. Once I update, holy smokes, we're doing so much better than we were the previous year. I'm going to narrow back down to previous period. And yeah, there is one caveat with the comparisons. If I was using a metric like bounce rate, for example, which of course is a measure of how many people leave the site after their first page visit, and I was to do a comparison to the previous quarter, you'll see that it's showing I had a decrease of 12.7% in my bounce rate metric. And those of you who have been in the web analytics sphere before are probably like, wait, but a decrease in bounce rate is actually good. And we do have a way to filter or rather adjust those colors on a per scorecard basis. So if I click into my scorecard here and I jump into the style settings, you'll see down here, these are my comparison field colors, and I can set it on a per card basis. So of course, for bounce rate, I know an increase in bounce rate is actually bad. So I'll set that to red. And I know decrease. Oh my goodness, I've gotten tongue-tied. Oh my gosh. A decrease in bounce rate is good. An increase in bounce rate is bad. And I can reflect these comparison fields here to reflect that. And you can see nothing changes here about my total users. An increase in user share is still positive. And yeah, now we've got a pretty robust report here that's looking at a couple of different things and is visualizing it in the ways that make the most sense for those metrics or for that analysis, which is great. But you might be thinking, hey, you showed me this thing earlier. Like I can see we're kind of piecing things together here, but what you're showing me right now is not what I was seeing on that last slide. Thankfully, styling a report in a way that looks a lot better than just shapes on a white background is pretty simple in Looker. So if you jump into the file settings here in the top left corner and then jump into theme and layout, if you are familiar with Google Slides or PowerPoint, this is kind of where you set your template and you can start building from there. So for example, I'll just start flipping through some of these until I find one that I want. That, of course, that constellation theme is sort of like your dark mode. That's the one that we were showing on this slide here. If I keep going through my theme settings, I can just find one that either more closely matches my brand or the look that I'm going for, and you can see everything updates automatically. So I really like this constellation. I really like this constellation theme, but maybe I'm delivering this report for a client who's very particular about their brand guidelines and they have a very particular font that they want to use. Any of these themes are basically just a jumping off point for you to develop further. So I'm going to apply this constellation theme, and then I'm going to click customize here at the top. And then I have all these different settings that affect the theme. There's a lot to go through here, so we're not going to do it all today. But just for our example, right, if I wanted to change the font that's used here, I can do that within this primary styles section. and I can select something. Comic Sans, why not? Who doesn't like Comic Sans? I have yet to see a way for you to add your own custom font, but there's a lot in here. I believe these are all Google fonts, so you can really pick and play and find what suits your needs best. And then, of course, let's say I like this font the best. I'm going to do a little bit of adjustment now with my newly selected theme. I'm going to stretch out these borders a little bit more. Perfect. And now to finish off branding it, maybe I want to add some text, again, provide more context about what folks are seeing. I can do that very quickly by clicking this text icon right here. And then this just sort of creates a text box, again, very similar to how it works in Google Slides or Microsoft PowerPoint. And then I can just give this a title. We'll call it Acme Test Reports. And then you adjust your text settings in here, very similar to the way that you would in Microsoft Word. If I want to bold something, I can. Italicize it, I can. So for this example, if I want to give a subtitle as well, I just copy and paste, and I'd say web analytics for example.com. And make this a little bit smaller, italicize it. And there you go. We went from one simple Excel spreadsheet looking report to something that actually looks, dare I say it, a little bit fun, a little bit interesting. I am a numbers dork, but looking at something like this versus your Excel spreadsheet or your Google Analytics or whatever can really help to engage folks in some of the conversations sometimes around analytics. And again, just to make decision-making faster, right? I immediately understand by looking at this data, something that we did from August 27th to September 4th greatly decreased our bounce rate. Like, let's do that again, right? And that's that kind of insight that happens quickly that maybe wouldn't happen as quickly as if we had chosen the wrong visualization. So there are a lot more charts in here. You've got these fancy geographic charts that highlight countries based on where folks are coming in from. You've got area charts, scatter plots, tree maps, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot for you here to play with. These are the most common visualizations that we use at Sandstorm because their use case are very common. But hopefully this should give you enough to start building out your own robust reports based on your own needs and to style them like so. I think that's it for now. I did just want to very quickly, if you have any questions, as I mentioned, I am a huge data nerd, and I know Nick is as well. I say that with the utmost respect. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, we love working in data with Looker Studio. There's a lot more that you can do with it. So feel free to reach out to us. My email and Nick's email are listed here. Or if you're interested about what Sandstorm can do for your analytics, not only in reporting, but creating custom events, doing multi-analytics platform management, feel free to visit the link on your screen or scan the QR code. That's sandstormdesign.com/capabilities/data analytics. I do want to pause really quick now. I know we've got some time. Are there any questions?
I will check right here. I do think we've got some questions coming in, so we'll go ahead and get started with the first one. Why should I use these visualizations instead of the default table?
Yeah, so again, I think the power of these different visualizations are that they allow people to make decisions quickly. I can't remember the exact stat that we had pulled, but we had included it in the original webinar that like by increasing decision time, like the general quote was like, if you increase your ability to make decisions faster, like organizational success like goes through the roof, right? And so by condensing down a lot of numbers and data into just one picture that is very easy to draw insight from, I think there are a lot of benefits.
I'd also add on to that. So folks that were familiar with using Universal Analytics, the old version of Google Analytics before GA4, they were used to all these great reporting and dashboard creating capabilities. When they launched GA4, Google made a strategic decision to say, we're not going to put as much reporting capabilities into Google Analytics anymore. We're going to have folks start using Looker Studio tools to do that sort of thing. So while you certainly have the built-in reports, but you have, I feel there's probably less built-in reports than there were in Universal Analytics, but more than that, the capability to create your own custom reporting in Google Analytics is really, they've moved away from that. They still have this concept explorations, they have some customizations you can do, but really strategically, they're just saying, Looker Studio gives you such a great flexible tool, so many things you can do with it, so much stuff Cam showed today and so much more, that you can get so much more out of that and just really get to the data you need faster that way.
Awesome. And it looks like we've got another question coming in. And so this question was more about that date range. And so obviously you've got that date drop down picker at the top there, and they want to know, does that apply to everything that would be on the dashboard? And is that still interactive for anybody that it gets shared out to, for them to pick and update all of the things on that dashboard?
Yeah, that is a great question. I'll go ahead and share my screen again. The short answer is yes, by default. If you add in a date range picker, it will apply to everything that you have in the report, right? So if instead of last quarter, I apply it to this year and I click apply, you'll see everything gets updated, right? But if we want to narrow in on something specific, like this date range picker works, but for our trend line, we want to focus in on a really narrow date range. What I can do is I can jump into the setup settings. And instead of using this auto, which as I'm highlighting it, it says it uses the default date range, which is set by this data picker. I can choose a custom date range. And then I can narrow in and say, okay, only show me the last quarter. Of course, you'll want to ensure that you are highlighting that somewhere on the report, because people will see this visual and maybe assume that that's the data that they're looking at. So what you can do on any of the visualizations, but in this example, the time series, if you jump into the style settings, there's a way to add a title to your charts. So if I check this on, Looker recently introduced this auto generate title feature, which sometimes is helpful. It's checked on by default, but we want to inform people that the data that they're looking at here is for Q3 only. So I can just adjust this here and say Q3 2024 only. So to answer your question, yes, the date picker by default will update everything on the report, but it's pretty easy to jump in here and update on a per chart basis what date range you're looking at. You'll just want to make sure if you're using these settings both in tandem, again, to provide that context, likely with a chart title or with some text or just visually talking through it.
So this sounds like it could be a really great tool too, if you just are somebody who wants to hang on to your dashboard and check it weekly or daily. It can kind of be evergreen, and then say you're curious about what happened last month or whatever. You can kind of manipulate that and check in on it versus having to go through all these hoops every time.
100%.
And then one last question here. What other types of visualizations exist? So outside of the ones that we've showed today, what are some of the other ones, and what might their use cases be?
Yeah, I will try to do a lightning round. Okay, let me share my screen again. There's a lot of them. And again, we wanted to share the ones that we found were your most common use case, right? But really, there are a bunch that Google offers off the bat. So we did talk about your bar charts, but you can also see there are these sort of stacked column and row charts. So if I want to drop one of these in, this is great for getting an idea of like the share of a certain dimension or metric. So for example, if I was looking at a on a granular level, by country, how much traffic I earned, and I wanted to break that down by city. I can get this really interesting kind of waterfall view, and start to understand, okay, out of 100% of traffic that came from the United States, I know through this visual that most of it came from New York, from this like 18.66%. So again, that's kind of a niche visualization, but if you want to kind of explore these different reports, and find a visualization that works best, should certainly feel free to do so. Another cool one that we mentioned was the geo chart. This one can be, it's mostly of interest, but if you are a global organization and you're interested in where you're generating most of your traffic, you can use something like this. This is basically just plotting that country data that we have in our data set onto a map and then color grading it. And again, there are all these different style settings that exist. If instead of blue, we wanted to use red, we could do that. Again, we found that this is mostly a cool to have and not really a need to have, but maybe you work at a more global organization. You can also always sort of narrow it down. If I want to do the or by the United States, for example, I could use this zoom feature, and just look in at North America and start to drill down further and further there using my drill down dimensions. So that's a cool one, but kind of has limited use.
Well, and that one, I find that, some of our clients sometimes want to know, should we start using translation services on our
Mhm.
site? And so sometimes being able to constantly check in on that map and see, is there an uptick? Is there a section, that country that's getting darker, that we should maybe look at and consider having a translation for those languages on our site? So this one can be kind of a helpful one for those clients who are quickly kind of trying to identify if that's an avenue they want to take.
Yeah, there's also this like heat map variant too, which would be helpful for that use case. Again, sometimes the data, like obviously not all of this traffic's coming from Colorado, it's just circling in on the United States. But anyways, there are use cases for it, and it's a fun one if you're able to work it into your report. I think potentially the most interesting, almost forgot to mention this one. This came in a recent update to Looker Studio, so for web marketing folks, I think this would be particularly useful, is the funnel visualization. And again, this just came out recently, but this is for like your goal tracking, things like that. I haven't played around with it too much, so definitely something to look into, but this is super helpful for things like checkout flow, right? If you're looking at where folks are abandoning and you have events set up in Google Tag Manager already to kind of track those steps, you could put all of this into a funnel and start to understand where folks are bouncing. If there are, if there's a high bounce rate at one certain step, this sort of visualization should be able to highlight it. So this is really new. And you might not even know it exists, because if you click on this add a chart, you need to scroll down further in order to find it. But the visualizations in Looker aren't even really limited to what Google provides. There's also this concept of community visualizations, which Google gives you an example here with this gauge, but there are also some of these other folks like Supermetrics who create these different visualizations for more and more niche use cases. I will say a lot of the time, these sort of third-party visualizations sometimes incur a fee. So you'll want to make sure to do a little bit of research before you start adding stuff to your report. But you can see there's a whole community of folks who have created things like a waterfall chart. You can draw an SVG image in your report. You can use those Google PageSpeed Insight or Lighthouse gauges in your report as well. There's a lot of folks doing really, really interesting stuff, but based on, the most common use cases, oftentimes we're just adding visualizations that exist in here.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that about wraps up our Q&A. I am going to drop a quick poll into our Zoom here. So just let me know if you all are able to see that poll pop up. We just had a couple questions that were, we, of course, even though this is the end of our Q&A, we still certainly are open. Our inboxes are open for you to reach out with additional questions, or if you just need additional help or consulting on Looker Studio. Like Cam said, he and Nick both love it, can't get enough. So we'd love to help you. But we are also looking for suggestions and your all's feedback and input on what we cover in our next part of this series. So if you all have anything that you'd like to share in the chat or in the poll with what some of your challenges might be, or things that you are looking to accomplish within Looker Studio, please let us know, and we would be more than happy to cover it in our next part in this series. And with that being said, I think that will just about wrap up our webinar for today. So again, thank you all so much for coming, and we will be sending out the deck later today, as well as transcripts and the recording later next week.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Take care.